what started my journey in whole is that in January, early January of 2010, my son had had enough of my aggressive behavior and went to the police. And there was a knock on my door, and it was the police, and they arrested me. And I was arrested for being aggressive, not for hitting anybody, but for being difficult. So I was charged with several crimes. Threatening behavior, because I opened my mouth a lot. And I was an aggressive, abusive person. My mouth was my weapon. My voice, my attitude was a weapon. My son had had enough of my stuff, and I don't blame him a bit. So I was arrested, and I couldn't go back home. And that's began the process that evolved court. My wife, ex, filed for divorce. I wasn't allowed to see them during the court case, and that was very difficult. So I had to live at a friend's house in Ottawa for a year and a half. And that, I'd like to say, forced my hand into making a pretty solid choice. Stand up and actually, for once, get some help and deal with the actual issues that are causing this pain. Stop lying to myself. Or give up on everything and walk away from life. And I felt that my brother was winning once again. And I couldn't live with the thought of him celebrating my coming undone and unraveled. And I woke up January 3rd, I'll never forget it, January 3rd of 2011, and I picked up the phone, and I called the cops in Ottawa, and I said, "Do you have such a thing as a police chaplain?" And they said yes, and I said, "Can I see him?" And they said yes. Ironically, the police chaplain was 2 blocks on Elgin Street from the Men's Project. So I went down to see the police chaplain, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say. And he was a wonderful man. He's an older gentleman. And he said, "I believe you." And he said, "Would you like some help?" Of course, I was thinking that help's not possible. And I thought, if only you knew, and sadly, of course, he did. And I said, "Yes, I want some help." So he walked down the road with me to the Men's Project. He physically walked down the road with me to the Men's Project. In retrospect, it was the best day of my life. So I decided that I made a commitment to myself that I would do everything I could, not only for myself, but for my kids. I felt I owed it to them, as well as to myself. So I threw myself in wholeheartedly into the Men's Project. I went in to talk. I met Rick. And he looked me in the eyes. And I knew that I had found what I needed. And I asked him if he knew where else I could get some help, and he did. And I reached out to another program. I went to a program at the Salvation Army called Seeking Safety. I went to take I took a course at Catholic Family Services on being safe in your relationship, something I wasn't. And I learned quite quickly that every person that I interacted with was paying the price for my childhood sexual abuse. Every person that I interacted with, I was pouring that venom out on them. Whether they were friends, whether they were family. I was torturing others for what had happened to me. I can remember Rick saying, okay, I'd love you to come to the Men's Project if you'd like to. And I said, yes. And so he lined me up with some other help, which I enrolled at. I jumped in with both feet. And I realized very quickly, maybe the first or second session, that this is where I needed to be. I felt driven to be there. The first 10 weeks at the Men's Project was phase one, and it was strictly information. So they weren't looking for input, they were giving you input. I remember sitting there thinking, I want to talk. And I was all ready to talk, and instead I listened, something that was difficult for me to do. And I listened to what they said about the parameters and what happens to people. And I realized, that's me. And I began to feel hope. First time in my life, I felt tangible hope. And hope that, I might not suffer like this, but also hope that I wouldn't hurt others. And for me, the shame I felt, like all survivors, was not just the shame, in my case, for feeling dirty, feeling worthless, feeling like everybody could see that I had been raped. But for me, of course, it was the shame of hurting my own kids, and the shame of not being able to see them. Of course, when my parents heard what I had done, my dad said, I never want to see you again. And that hurt, because he didn't protect me, and he's telling me I'm worthless and he didn't want to see me again. And fortunately, that actually drove me to work harder at the Men's Project. I immersed myself in it, feeling like this is my chance, this is my opportunity to be me. Not be him, but be me. So I immersed myself in the program wholeheartedly. And I went to the Men's Project I was in phase 2 for 70 weeks. Some people stayed 20 weeks, some people stayed 40 weeks. I kept on saying to Rick, I'm not ready to leave, I want to stay. And I need to stay, and I need to work on it. And I stayed 70 weeks. I took 14 binders full of notes. I still have those 14 binders. By the time I was halfway through the program, everybody was jokingly calling me the professor, because I was so interested in writing stuff down. And part of it is that I couldn't go home. So I was staying at my friend's place, had no avenue, I couldn't talk to my kids. And I would read what I had written. And every time I read it, I believed it more. And every time Rick would say something, I'd write it down. I'd read it over and over, and I'd start to feel, it was like a little piece of me started to believe. Started to realize that I didn't have to be a victim. I didn't have to punish myself. I didn't have to punish others. And that perhaps, just perhaps, I could do something for somebody else. I had never been able to do anything for anybody else. I couldn't take care of myself. And I had began to feel like I was part of something bigger. Recovery. And when I was 30 weeks into the program, the Graham James story broke. And Rick came to group one day and said, CBC News are coming in to cover us and get our feedback on Graham James' story. And he asked a couple of the guys who are further into the program, and they didn't want to do it. And I said, I want to do it. I really want to do this. And it started out as a 3.5-minute interview that lasted 30 minutes. And they broadcast the whole thing. And I thought, wow. And I got a massive amount of positive feedback from it. And it felt good. Not because I was the center of attention, but because I was drawing attention to something massively worthwhile. And it was a profoundly positive experience.